contribution towards sustainable development. We see the good news is that we see leaders in nearly every geographic. So it's a myth that they only exist in Europe. They're everywhere. They are in every segment of the value chain. But what is also true is that there are laggards in every jurisdiction, and there are laggards in every part of the value chain that somehow don't manage to live up to their responsibility. And what is really, so that's that, you could say that's a fact, and we can look at that from the data. But I think what sits underneath that and what makes this conversation so important is whether you contribute a lot or whether you contribute very little in today's world means not enough it's not consequential enough to the success of your business. And accountability is really a way of making the impact that companies have on people and planet, whether that's positive or negative, to make that consequential for the success of business. Because if there's not that relationship between impact and it's almost impossible to ask business to transform. So it's really great to see this momentum being built up. And Sandra, I'm sure you will speak more to this about the importance of corporate accountability in our global agendas and the importance of the UN playing a role in doing that. And I'm really pleased that we're having this conversation today here at the heart of the UN, because the UN is probably the only platform in the world that has the legitimacy and the capacity to articulate what actually the responsibility of business is towards our global agendas, particularly towards our. My hope for this session with all the speakers from different perspectives, from state and from non-state actors, is that we take a few steps in clarifying the responsibility of business towards food system transformation, and to identify some of the steps that will be required to do that going forward. So that's enough for me. Sandra, it's a great pleasure to welcome you as the Executive Director and Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations UN Global Compact, and I think we're all looking forward to hearing some of your remarks about this topic of corporate accountability within the broader UN frameworks. Well, if this works.
Good morning. I don't know if you can hear me. Great. Well, good. First of all, thank you so very much to all of you for making your time to join us for this very important session. As has been said, I'm the Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact. I wanted to take some time to talk a little bit about what just to situate the discussions. So the UN Global Compact was formed 25 years ago. Actually, we turned 25 this month in July. And it was formed by the then Secretary General Kofi Annan, because there was a recognition back in the year 1999 to 2000, the private sector was playing such a critical role in the world, but also in the ecosystem of the United Nations. And Kofi Annan then proposed an agreement between private sector and the United Nations in all its spheres to advance the mission of the United Nations. And for those 25 years and beyond, specifically UN Global Compact has been working to bring business closer to the United Nations, to work with business to support their efforts to be more resilient, more sustainable, more competitive, more responsible, more transparent, but also to contribute to the agenda of the United Nations. So that's what the UN Global Compact does. Many of you may interact with the UN through different agencies, entities, funds, and programs. They also have strong and robust private sector partnerships. But what is important is the UN, as you know, is founded on a set of normative principles. And those principles really form the bedrock of the work of the United Nations and also our engagement with business. And so it's been great, along with colleagues from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, as well as the FAO Hub, to have the honor to convene businesses to join us also in this food systems transformation agenda. The Secretary General called for corporate accountability back in 2023, so it is not a new agenda. UN Global Compact, our partners, the World Benchmarking Alliance, and many others have been making sure that there's progress in the private sector community towards doing good business, doing responsible business, and of course, being sustainable. As we situate ourselves in this discussion on food systems, I first want to say that business is engaged. Business has been part of food systems for many years. I don't know that we can think of any part of the food system that does not involve business, from seed and seed production to technology, even the most rudimentary around planting and harvesting, to advanced technology now, lots of great discussions on data, AI, and precision farming, to storing, logistics, markets, retail, and post and food management, waste management thereafter. So private sector is engaged. the business constituents who've come to this summit, about 300 of them, are truly integrated into food systems. So I would like those who are not from the private sector to truly see the private sector as an ally in food systems transformation. Broadly speaking, I think across all areas of the Sustainable Development Goals, we're having a strong call for private sector engagement, not simply for financing, but for innovation, for jobs and skills, for building markets, for strengthening markets, and for working all across the value chain to unleash and unlock value. So I think, in that context, I also just want to situate some parts that we know are areas where we need to work towards and improve. For us, the work that we do in Global Compact is very much about progress, not perfection. And that's why an accountability framework is so critical to be able to lay down the metrics, demonstrate what good looks like, and make sure that we can track progress. So we all know collectively from the state and the non-state sector that food insecurity, climate change, biodiversity loss, and many others are key areas where we to work to build gaps. But the good news, and I think we've seen it, anybody who did some of the field visits here, anybody who works in the field will see that private sector is working not only with large multinationals, but smallholder farmers and SMEs to make improvements all across the value chain, working to strengthen livelihoods, create jobs, tackle climate crisis, and create thriving and bustling economies. Collectively with our partners, we work to advance responsible business practices across operations and value chains. We know that companies can drive regenerative agriculture, they can promote fair labor standards, they can reduce food waste, carbon emissions, and biodiversity loss. We do know that collectively we need to do this work together, public, private, civil society, to make sure that this transformation occurs. Also, and part of our key parts of our accountability framework is making sure that voluntary commitments feed into national food system pathways, feed into nationally determined contributions. Not simply accountability for business sake, it's accountability at the state level. We know we only have 5 years left towards the Sustainable Development Goals, such strong calls to action for private sector engagement. And just to stress, this accountability is not to the United Nations, it's to citizens, consumers, the broader stakeholder ecosystem. I just want to close with 3 action points that I think we must all do as we advance the accountability discussion. The first is that our accountability consultation and mechanisms that we will discuss and announce today formally is informed by a wide range of stakeholders. We don't sit only private sector to determine what accountability is. We sit in consultation with other non-state actors, and we sit with government as well. We've just had a session in plenary where many of the ministers present also echoed the importance of and the validity of the corporate accountability consultation that we want to advance further. We've had roundtables in a couple of countries. Accountability needs to include issues such as energy and logistics efficiency, as well as innovation. Strong call to standardize protocols, metrics, and monitoring instruments. Strong focus on small and medium farmers and financial instruments. So accountability covers a wide range of elements within the food systems transformation. So the first is, this is a consultative process. The second, generating clear and accessible measurable data is so essential for accountability and for business. And on this, I just want to say that publicly tracking progress helps build trust along consumers, investors, showcases strategies, and encourages others. Our partner, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, has published and circulated a compendium of good business models where private sector is engaging in an accountable manner in food systems transformation. But data is also important because businesses react to market, they react to consumers. Accountability is a feedback mechanism that is used in many ways in terms of markets. And finally, to accelerate wide-scale and consistent progress on accountability, companies need a blueprint, they need clear standards, and they need targets at the global level. And so towards this goal, together with our partners, WBCSD, the FAO, and others, we do want to announce a refreshed coalition and a consultative process on corporate accountability for food systems. UN Global Compact, the World Benchmarking Alliance, the UN Environment, and other partners are working to create a corporate accountability blueprint for governments, companies, and non-state actors to guide work on environmental impact, climate change, social protection, food systems, finance, and good governance. And I invite you all to contribute to this process. Together, I know that we can sow the seeds for more inclusive, and resilient and bountiful future, with the private sector being a key responsible actor. Thank you so very much.
Sandra, thank you so much for these comments and for reminding us how important and vital the private sector is and the role it's already playing from a farm to fork perspective, and to lay some of the foundations that are already in place. So we don't need, this is not a conversation that we need to pick up from scratch. I think if I may add also from a UN perspective, we've had the Pact for the Future with Action 55C, recognizing the importance of strengthening private, just recently coming all from Seville, where we agreed on financing for development, and where we have seen paragraph 36C that calls for the responsibility, clarifying the responsibility of business towards these UN frameworks. And with that, I would like to move into our fireside conversation with Ambassador Ertharin Cousin. You are not only the CEO of Food Systems for Future, but you're also a board member of Bayer, and I believe many other companies in the food and agriculture space. So when we talk about corporate accountability, what better place to start? If I may kick you off with a question, and to pick up on this line of responsibilities, what do you see as the responsibility of business with regards to improving food system outcomes from an environment, the climate, and nutrition, social perspective? Are they clear? And where is consensus, and where do you still find disagreement that makes it difficult for you to navigate that?
Well, let me begin by saying thank you for including Bayer in this conversation today. And thank you, Sandra, for those opening remarks. You gave us a starting point for the conversation, because when you talked about private sector's role in the food system, when there's a recognition that private sector controls the production, distribution, and marketing of food, as you noted. And so the responsibility, we must build trust with our consumers and our communities that we serve and the governments who regulate us. Our use of accountability frameworks and trust and transparency, I should say, build that trust that is necessary. That very simply gives the corporations the license to operate. Because without trust, we do not have the license to operate that is necessary. That accountability and transparency also supports our ability to deliver on our responsibility for health and nutrition outcomes. As food systems actors, we play a significant role in delivering the food that is necessary to support the nutritional needs of the consumers who are customers. It also enables better policy when we have and policy as well as the regulation, when you have the accountability and the transparency that's necessary. But you ask a question, you say, where are the hurdles? The reality is that many corporations, and I'm proud to say that Bayer is not one of them, are reluctant to publish the data regarding the commitments that they make. But in order for consumers to make the choices that are necessary, that's the sustainable transformation of the food system, they need informed decision-making. And that only occurs when corporations are willing to publish the data regarding their actions, as well as their achievements, as well as their hurdles, so that there's some reality to the data that they provide.
Thank you so much. And if you sit on the board of Bayer, which gives you a specific perspective. And if I'm not mistaken, Bayer is governed by this mission of health for none. How does that translate in your role as a board member and understanding these responsibilities and helping guide the companies through this complex field?
Thank you. I sit on the board of the supervisory board of Bayer, as you note. I also hold the position of chair of our sustainability committee, which means that I lead the conversation or the shareholders with management on ensuring that the commitments that management has made, both for their sustainability goals, including the target of supporting 100 million smallholder farmers, but also the science-based targets for the reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions of the corporate operations that we as the shareholder representatives, and I would argue the stakeholder representatives, have the responsibility to question management on, are they really achieving? And there's no better place. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about these issues here in this forum, because this is a stock take. And the stock take is not just about the commitments we've made, progress that we've delivered. And that's what we, as a board member, I regularly assess the corporations, and when I say the corporation, management's progress on what they have committed to perform. And in any corporation, what gets measured is what counts. And not only what gets measured, but what leaders get paid for is what counts. And so when we at Bayer made these commitments, we also tied compensation for the leadership of the organization to the achievement of those commitments. And so it was not just about our ability to publish, but it is about our ability to determine whether or not the remuneration that management would receive is actually reflective of their financial performance, as well as their achievement of the sustainability goals. That I in particular lean into that sustainability target of supporting 100 million smallholder farmers.
You've been very concise in your answer, so I'm going to permit myself one more question before we move to the government, because you picked up on the role of policy already in your remarks. Mm-hmm. So before we move to the government themselves, a question I have is, how do you these 100 million farmers do not live in one country, they live all over the world. How do you navigate all these different, not only government expectations, but also societal expectations around the globe as a global company?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Thank you very much. Because we are not just a corporation that operates in Europe or the United States, where communication of those goals is, some would argue, easier, and achieving those goals is somewhat easier. We operate across the globe, and as such, we depend upon the people who are part of the Bayer team to support not only the implementation of those goals, but the communication and the reporting of those goals to the appropriate government entities in the places where we operate. And we empower those teams. We have a program called DSO, where the teams work together to ensure that they know exactly what responsibilities are to meet the goals, and that they know how to communicate that responsibility. And that accountability starts there at the ground level with those who work, but it is also communicated up so that it ensures that what we say we do at the top, we know we do on the ground, and what we know we achieve on the ground, we can report out in the corporate at corporate level.
Thank you so much for that final remarks. And to this question of reporting and data, we'll come back a little later during this session, which is, of course, a vital point that has been coming back in many of the reflections. We're now going to move to sort of four government perspectives from different places around the world, governments struggling and with different challenges when it comes to food system transformation. So I would like to start by inviting Dr. Vanreen Sanjo. He's the Director of the Ocean Department and the Federal Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning of Nigeria. And he's also Nigeria's national convener for food systems, to take the next sort of 5 minutes and give us your perspective. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, for us in Nigeria, the first thing that occurred to us when we come implementation of our priority actions for the food system in Nigeria was the issue of data. We actually wanted whatever we want to do to be data-driven. And that now led us to the development of a food system dashboard. And that food system dashboard has been instrumental to tracking the progress that we are making in the implementation of the food system. It has been providing data-driven insight to inform food and nutrition outcomes, then climate issues, as well as social protection. And also, the dashboard has also enabled and it has allowed our policymakers to identify regional differences, regional disparities. So that each of the region, we know we have 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria. So each of the zones has their own differences. So the individual regions will be able to identify what are the differences, what step to be taken to address the issue of agri-food system transformation, and also the nutrition issue. And also we also use it to monitor progress and prioritize interventions which will be based on which is evidence-based. For any meaningful governance or any policy to thrive well, you need data. And for any party, for instance, if any partner is coming to meet with me, the first thing I let them know is that we have a platform that we are using to drive whatever we are doing. There was an organization, an alliance in Nigeria and Africa that was just, constituted now, Alliance for Local Food and Nutrition Supply Chain. When they approached me, I told them that if you want to work with us, you'll be ready to work with all these 36 states in Nigeria, but on geopolitical zonal basis. And that's why I said that the regional disparity is easily identified with respect to the way we are moving. It has also improved alignment across all MDAs because all federal ministry departments and agencies are working together. We have about 14 or to 16 ministry departments and agencies in Nigeria that are working together, and we cannot work outside data. And the platform is a very robust, infrastructure that enabled the effective delivery of agri-food system transformation in Nigeria. And I can assure you that we also developed, apart from the food system dashboard, we also have nutrition dashboard, which we developed. So that while we are tracking the agri-food system transformation or the implementation or intervention across all the 6 geopolitical zones, we're also having similar thing on nutrition. And nutrition is now aligning with whatever we're having with respect, what are the social protection opportunities that are inherent in driving the nutrition down to the grassroots level, because on nutritional basis, we are driving our nutrition intervention to local government level. And that's why Nigeria is having an initiative from the presidency now, which we call Nutrition 774. So that means the 774 local government in Nigeria are being carried along in the delivery of agri-food system, transformation system, including nutrition outcomes. And I also want to, for the private sector angle, I want to say that the data that we are getting from dashboard, the dashboard has a robust database. Without a robust database, there's nothing the dashboard will give you. So with that, it gives us an opportunity to also serve as tools that the government is using to engage with the private sector. It enables us to highlight investment gaps. It also enables us to identify market opportunities. It gives us areas where private sector's innovation can help improve food system efficiency. That is from the production to distribution. For instance, we have platforms like the Nigeria Agribusiness Group that are working collaboratively with government. They are the one that has actually provided the directive and the direction in terms of private sector involvement in agri-food system transformation. We also have the that serve as a bridge for government and private sector dialogue to ensure that policy decisions are responsive to market structure. Because whatever we are doing, we are looking at this market. Even if you produce food, if the production is enhanced, then what about the market? What about the people that are going to enjoy it? And in the area of accountability, we give accountability a sort of importance. And that gives us accountability is actually a challenge, we all know, but at the same time, it is an opportunity for us to track implementation across board. So because some of our regulators, they need stronger monitoring system before they can thrive well. Then we also extend that link data to real-time feedback. And also, we also need more transparent reporting framework that include civil society organizations and the consumer voice. We are not limiting everything to government. We are looking at their target because of inclusivity as is required from the SDGs recommendation. We also have it also gives us opportunity to have a sustained investment in digital infrastructure to ensure regular data collection, because when we have a dashboard, we cannot allow it just to be hanging. It has to be functioning. And for it to be functional, we need to make sure that we populate the database so that we have online time series data that will give us a feedback on whatever is happening within the agri-food system. It also gives us an opportunity to strengthen our institution. Institution strengthening and capacity building is one of the critical areas. And for the role of global corporate accountability, I just want to run through everything. So the role of global corporate accountability, they can help us, Nigeria, to bridge the gap between public and private sector actions towards achieving our national food system priorities. And I saw when the person from the institute was talking the other time, and we are looking at our navigation. So that navigation should cut across developing countries and including Nigeria. You are welcome at any point in time. We are ready to receive anybody that is ready to support and contribute to our implementation. And our commitment through the 17 recommendations that we submitted to the UN during the first Food System Summit in 2021. System, it is inclusive, it is a sustainable food system, but we still need private sector, both local and multinational, to align and contribute to all these goals that we have set to ourselves for ourselves. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for, yes. Thank you so much for your clarity, for the reminder that we need data-driven systems, for the reminder that we're ultimately accountable to citizens and that therefore they need an opportunity to feed back into our systems, and the invitation to come and help with implementation. And maybe one day we'll see that the dashboard can also help support and track the performance of companies operating in Nigeria, helping this food system transformation enable. So with that, I would like to move to Dr. Inaya Ezzeddini as a member of the Lebanese Parliament, where she's a chairperson of the Women and Children Parliamentary Committee, and the SDG 2030 Agenda Parliamentary Commission. She's also the national convener for food systems in Lebanon. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Of course, in Lebanon, companies already play a significant role in shaping the food system, but for that role to support resilience, it must shift from unchecked, profit-driven influence to accountable partnership. And we've learned that corporate actors can and must contribute to resilience by reducing market concentration. And I will be telling you the parliamentary and legislative initiatives done to take care of this, and opening space for SMEs and cooperatives, and adopting sustainable practices, antibiotic and pesticide use, investing in local sourcing and infrastructure, especially in underserved and war-affected regions. And we did some pilot projects to work within the concept of sustainable, resilient, and inclusive food system in areas affected by war, providing transparent labeling for pricing and ethical advertising, especially where food literacy is low, adopting better practices to reduce food loss and reuse of leftovers, helping to create a circular economy, and committing to nutritious, safe, and affordable food production. To incentivize this shift, the Lebanese parliament has approved an anti-monopoly and fair competition law and market concentration law. Also, in our proposed right to food law, we call for establishment of a national food system council that includes the private sector representatives, but also hold them accountable. They are partners, they are stakeholders, but they should be accountable through monitoring, evaluation, benchmarks, and being part of the decision-making process. And also, we are in the process of reviewing our public-private partnership law. And during the banning, for the banning of the cholesterol, I will give an example how we, for banning the cholesterol in poultry farm, which was really raised a health hazard. We know that cholesterol is a very precious antibiotic for human use, especially for severely ill patients in intensive care. And we noticed that there is a high resistance to this antibiotic in these patients. And the cause was the use of this cholesterol into the poultry farm. We brought together all the companies, private sector, researchers, and ministries. For around 2 years, we had to work. We submitted evidence-based material in collaboration with academic centers on research proving that this colistin given in the poultry sector is contaminating the soil, the water, and systemically the plants, and it found its way also to human beings, and was responsible for this health hazard and the high morbidity in our patients. And despite initial resistance by the private sector, we could, and despite also the regulatory clarity and the scientific evidence, this dialogue helped us later on convince the Ministry of Agriculture to issue a resolution for banning the use of colistin in the poultry, the import and the exchange of colistin in the poultry farm, in the poultry sector in animal farms. And now the corporate actors, they are part of the enforcement of this resolution. And what made this possible was a mix of legal mandates, public health framing. We were linking this, of course, to the SDG 3, health, and transparent performance metrics backed by independent research institutions. What I can conclude with for this part is that the private sector, of course, has a role. They are an important partner in Lebanon, but they are not only as implementers, but as co-responsible actors, and this requires the government to standards. And here I would like to mention that now we are reviewing all the standards for the food industry in Lebanon, especially into domestic production rather than importing, and this is very important. And private sector, we cannot rely only on just voluntary calls for cooperation. There should be regulations of this partnership.
Thank you so much for what I believe is really a practical example. Antibiotic resistance is something that we face all over the world. It's an enormous challenge. You've given a really practical example for what accountable partnerships mean. I think laying out some of the foundations, data, independent verification, everyone at the table, clarity and responsibility. So I think it's a really excellent example of what it would look like on the ground. I'm now going to move to my right to Mr. Jarod Indarto. He's the Director of Food and Agriculture at the Ministry of National Development Planning in Indonesia. And he's also Indonesia's systems. And again, the floor is yours.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our experience. From the Indonesia's perspective, policy and regulation plays very important role in ensuring that private sector can engage in the food system, and we experience that their contribution is very significant in Indonesia case. The government recognizes that the private sector is a key driver along the value chains to increase the transparency and accountability in the commitments and action of the private sector in the food system transformation. The government adopts a participatory and also inclusive approach in formulating the regulations. This inclusive process aims to build a shared vision, common understanding, and also collective ownership among the stakeholders, not only from the government side. With the use of that kind of dialogue and cooperation with all parties, we aim to ensure that regulatory framework are reflected, because all parties have a common goals and also share responsibilities. This will also reinforce our commitment to good governance principles. This regulation will function as a binding and moral framework for all actors across the sectors and also level of society and level of governments. They will help standardize practices, monitor progress, and also hold all parties accountable to agreed certain targets and principles. Allow me to examples. One is developing clear and integrated cross-sectoral framework by involving, of course, the multi-stakeholders. For example, we develop several roadmaps and also initiatives related to circular economy, blue economy, food loss and waste, as well as coconut roadmap for downstreaming. Those all roadmaps and initiatives are developed together. That is process of multi-stakeholders in that case. So then all parties, including private sector, can see that roadmap and see the rooms for engaging in that roadmaps. Second is supporting the data of the data availability, as our colleague mentioned from Nigeria. For example, sustainability report is one of our mechanism that is already established by the government. Another example is we have what we call one data Indonesia, where data producers, methodology, and also sources of data are provided publicly. In the especially in the case of food system, we are delighted to be supported by GAIN to have a food system dashboard. This food system dashboard is not only at national level, but it covers provincial and district level. As you may know that we have almost 40 provinces and more than 500 districts. So subnational data is covered in that dashboard. The third is integrating the private sectors into government programs. For example, on fortification program, we work together with the private sectors to fortify some staple foods, including rice, flour, cooking oil, as well as salt. So in conclusion, transparency and accountability in private sector commitments require a combination of regulatory frameworks, public data systems, and constructive engagement. Indonesia is gradually moving in that direction, and we see great value in sharing and learning from global practices from all of you as we move forward with our food system transformation. Thank you.
And thank you to you for also for laying out the ingredients of what's necessary for transparency and accountability in the food system in Indonesia. And I think the way you started off by saying how it requires to bring all parties to the table for an inclusive dialogue that then informs, I think, what you call the binding and moral framework, I think is a really welcome message, and also what we're trying to do here today by bringing everyone to the tables. Thank you so much. We now move to our final government speaker, which is Ambassador Wampi Libon. She's the Director for Inclusive Green Growth and Ambassador for Sustainable Development of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands.
Yes, thank you. I think it's a really important matter. So many Dutch companies are recognized for their investments in sustainable food systems and food system transformation because they're international active. They have a lot of innovation capacity and a clear position in the global supply chain. But to contribute to this positive transition, companies really need to continuously innovate and be transparent. So this requires new business models, digitalization, robotization, and intense and fair collaboration. And over the years, I think that we see that the benchmarks and broader work of organizations like the World Benchmark Alliance have contributed to creating very valuable insights into company policies and providing policymakers as us with the much needed gaps and where we still have work to be done. So if you look at the index of the WBA, but also the work of the Access to Nutrition Initiative, it clearly shows that although a lot has been achieved, there is also still work to be done. So for example, only a small percentage of companies share data on optimizing fertilizer use. So that's only 10%. And also reducing pesticide use is not really something that most companies report on. That's only 4%. So this data really makes it possible to have conversations with the companies and how we can achieve a contribution to a more healthier and more sustainable food supply. We believe that really if you have greater transparency and measures, you can help to foster also systemic change. For our food system in the Netherlands, we also have a food system that is under pressure. And so in the Netherlands, the key priority areas we are working on in a public-private partnership approach is towards sustainable security of food supply, combating food waste and loss, finding alternative proteins through pricing, investing in good agricultural practices, reducing biodiversity loss, access to water, and of course, provision of sustainable and affordable healthy diets. So it's really a whole package that a lot of action is taking. And of course, there are a couple of examples. For example, we have a foundation Together Against Food Waste, where a couple supported by Minister of Agriculture to see how you can learn, how you can minimize food waste and loss and reuse the surplus of food. We have also innovators like companies like Mosa Meat and Meatable that are really scaling up cultural meat and precision fermentation to create low impact food from alternatives to animal proteins. And I think it's important to look at these new innovative ways of doing business also because, of course, food and food production has still such a huge influence on our CO2 emissions. So 1/3 of the food production is responsible for the CO2 footprint. So these priorities are directed in public-private initiatives. If you look then to profitability, I think the speakers, different stakeholders have to play their role, companies, institutions, public sectors. As you know, in Europe, we have frameworks like the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive and also the Deforestation Regulation. I know they're not always that popular here in the room, but I think they provide a framework to better ourselves and to make the process to better the process where we are working in. And at the same time, we have to also look at incentives. So it's about regulation, but it's also about incentivizing good practices. So, for example, in the Netherlands, we try to incentivize circular agricultural and regenerative agriculture. So to look there. If you look at companies, and I heard really good example of the UN Compact, also in the Netherlands, they are at the forefront of the transformation, because I think companies need to move from corporate social responsibility projects to owning it all through the value chain, and have really an governance goals, ESG governance goals, really on the corporate level. And I heard Bayer's example. I think that's really something to look at how you can take it further. Because I think for us as policymaker, but also as consumers, as long as you have companies that themselves take the step ahead and feel that it's useful for the consumers to set them apart from other companies, I think that's the best way to incentivize and make transformation possible. And to end, I just also wanted to mention financial institutions, because I think also financial institutions have a big role to play. They can assess ESG risk, they can engage also corporates to improve their action plans. And of course, we have a lot of platforms that are really useful for that. So we have Forest IQ, we have FAIR, that really enable us to evaluate. And also I would like to mention NGOs like Fairtrade, Rainforest Alliance, the Dutch Food Alliance. So there are a lot of NGOs also doing really good work in this space. So to end, I think we need everybody. And everybody has its role to play. And yeah, I think we're making progress, but there is a lot to do still.
Thank you. Provided an excellent segue to the next panel. Up on one thing you said, which is the CSDDD, which is a horrible acronym and apparently not popular in this room, although it is not always. So I think what is one thing that's important, it is a true game changer, as I'm sure accountants can testify to in Europe, and I'm sure in Bayer as well, in terms of corporate accountability. And I think what is important to, even though it's a European regulation, I think what is important to keep recognizing is that it's based on the UN guiding principles that were agreed in rooms like this. So I think it's also a testimony to the power of the UN and member states to come together. When they set norms, they can ultimately flow into national regulation, not only in the EU, also Malaysia, Japan, and many countries moving into that direction, which I know multilateralism is under pressure, but I think it's an important reminder about what the norm setting power of an organization like the UN is. Ambassador, you ended. That's absolutely true, that corporate accountability truly requires a collective effort, including the contribution of many non-state actors. You mentioned one already, which is the Access to Nutrition Initiative, one of our dear colleagues that have done phenomenal work over the last decade in terms of clarifying the role of business when it comes to improving nutritional outcomes for people. So with that, I would like to turn to our first panelist, Susanna Stormer, partner at PwC Denmark and board member of the Access to Nutrition Index. And I'm going to kick you off with a question, because where do you see companies are the most challenged in their role supporting the transition to delivering more sustainable food systems? And what changes in practice have you seen over time, and how many professionals, and this relates a little bit to your role as PwC, how many professional service firms how can they be instrumental in advancing corporate accountability? It's a big question, so you're free to choose what you like to answer.
Big questions. Felt like the other previous speakers to thank you for this initiative. I think it's really important. In my professional life, I've been working for corporate accountability and corporate sustainability in so many facets. So this is really like going into a candy store for me. But to answer your question, I think we should recognize that business leaders are confronted with numerous complex challenges, and not least triggered by the uncertainties that have been introduced in the current geopolitical landscape. And if anything, business leaders don't like uncertainty. They thrive in environments where there's political stability, transparent and consistent regulatory frameworks that create a level playing field and allow them enough certainty to make investments into the future. Also, decisions find evidence, not feelings and assumptions. And basically, most of them also want to do the right thing. But their actions often have unintended consequences that may cause harm to people, communities, and the environment, which is why initiatives such as the UN Global Compact is helping sensitize to those impacts. And importantly, also from a business perspective, and I think Ms. Cousin addressed that as well, it exposes them to their business to risks that could undermine their ability to stay in business. So that's the situation. But then when we talk here in these rooms knowingly about food systems, We understand that it touches upon issues like environment, nutrition, social equality, and finance. But to be fair, few people in business have the same sophisticated perception. And they need to be provided with incentives. And that is why the framework, the corporate accountability framework, is really useful, because when it asks the hard questions and does so in the right way, it provokes reflection that will lead to action in business. So if you're not in the food and agricultural sector, nutrition and food quality is hardly top of mind in a crowded board meeting. And yet food is front and center for any business that has employees, customers, suppliers, business partners, engagers in their local communities. So it's a matter of focus and attention. This is the first hurdle to overcome. We have to make the issues relevant and tangible, and then to make it desirable to change practices that are not conducive to the sustainable, resilient food systems that we want. And this brings me to share another reflection that's been triggered by after I've seen. So it has become common practice to counter of a circle of stakeholders as a way to remind its leadership to consider and seek to include all legitimate stakeholder expectations. But critically, such an illustration misses an important point, that the company is not the center of the universe. On the contrary, it is a component in a large and complex system that is beyond its control. So by introducing a more reflective view, where businesses understand how they also depend on the other actors, we force business leaders to recognize their role in that bigger system and help them to understand where the impacts and dependencies lie and how they can tackle them. For oftentimes one company cannot change the system alone, which is why we also need to incentivize partners and alliances. So what I'm saying is that we in this room and all those actors seek change in business practices, we have a key role in challenging conventional thinking and supporting business leaders as they take steps to advance corporate accountability. And here I think we can learn from other domains, notably in the space of the climate agenda that's been mentioned, and the long-standing work to protect the environment, which is by now a household term in any business and corporate setting. So thanks to GRI, my neighbor here, WWF, CARE, many other civil society organizations, business leaders have been sensitized to the adverse impacts of business on the environment. Thanks to the UN and the UN Global Compact, businesses embrace the SDGs and seek ways to demonstrate how they support global goals. Thanks to CDP, TCFD, SASB, IRC, WBA, of transparent, credible, consistent, and comparable disclosures have triggered contextual information that has made their way into corporate annual reports. And thanks to market-driven and regulatory initiatives like the ISSB, the European CSRD regulation, and the supporting European reporting standards, we've also seen the emergence of very specific guidance that companies must comply with if they want to match their peers and stay competitive. So the corporate accountability framework wisely does build on much of that existing work, and allow me to encourage you to stay close to what's already out there. We don't need more reporting, we need smarter reporting. This would, in my book, include the detailed disclosure requirements developed by ATNI for its global index of food and beverage companies, which have been carefully and thoughtfully vetted by experts, experienced policymakers and investors and other users of the data provided. So this is decision useful information served on a silver plate right there. So when it comes to access to nutrition, many of the same criteria apply as when we talk about access to health, which is the arena I know well. It has 4 dimensions: access, affordability, availability, and quality. So I would expect to see these dimensions reflected in a corporate accountability framework for food systems too. Next, the same elements as the TCFD and TNFD recommendations provide, accounting for strategy, risk, governance, performance metrics, and not least to demonstrate the roadmap towards progress. And third, to make it clear, as has been said many times by other speakers, that a healthy diet is essential to the health and well-being of all humans, and that it is right to be protected and respected, which is why the UN guiding principles must be baked into the framework. So then let me clarify a question. What would be the most persuasive argument to make business leaders want to support the creation of sustainable, equitable food systems? The business case and the promise of more profits, the hard facts of the consequences to society of inaction, or a more altruistic argument that taking action will benefit the next generations, your own grandchildren. The reality is that we need to activate all three modes of influence: economics, evidence, and emotions. For while leaders in business may not be as sophisticated in their thinking on these issues, they are humans too, and humans do not all think alike.
Thank you, Susanna, for these incredibly thoughtful remarks and for inviting us also to reflect on these questions and to flip the script, the center of the universe. That also applies to NGOs like ourselves who place themselves at the center of a theory of change, which is hardly ever true. So thank you for that challenge. With that, I would like to move to our second panelist, Fabrice de Klerk, the Chief Science Officer at the EAT Foundation and the co-author of the very notable EAT Lancet Commission on Food, Planet and Health. And we're also proud to have him in our expert review committee of the Food and Agriculture Benchmark that was previously mentioned. I will try to not do the same and summarize this question for you. And so how would you describe the state of scientific consensus around food system transformation and the role that business can and needs to play?
Great. It's very hard to follow you, Suzanne. That was those were great comments. So hello everyone. Fabrice de Klerk with the Alliance of Biodiversity in CIAT and the EAT Lancet Commission. And I'm also going to throw another hat in the middle, according lead author of the food chapter of the IPBES Nexus Assessment, because I think it's an assessment that's sorely missing at this venue. So first question in terms of what's the role of scientific consensus around food and transformation. And so first, I just want to remind people that science is a process of inquiry. And so when you engage with a group of scientists, we're going to debate, we're going to ask questions, we're going to have different perspective on some elements. But I do think that when we step back, what we're seeing, and I hope you agree with me, is that there is significant consensus on the challenge that we're confronted with. The science is clear. Transforming food systems is not optional, it's foundational, and that business are not just bystanders in that transition, but they are architects in that process. If you look at the IPBES assessment, the Nexus assessment, the Transform Change assessment, which Rosalind in the back there was an author on, the Lancet Commission, I think the evidence is astounding. And we know that food systems sit at the heart of environmental challenges and of justice challenges. This includes climate change, biodiversity loss, malnutrition, and inequality. One of the concerns that I share this week is that when we talk about environment, it's too often relegated to climate. And one point I think that we want to emphasize to you is that environment is all 9 planetary boundaries. It's climate, it's water, it's biodiversity, it's pollution, it's novel entities. When we look at food systems and the 6 transgressed planetary boundaries, food systems is 30% of climate, as you highlighted. It's more than 80% of 5 other planetary boundaries. We need to pay attention that this is not just a food and climate challenge, but it's a food and multidimensional challenge across environments. Second, recognizing that food has significant impact on human health. 15 million premature deaths per year due to inability to access healthy diets. This includes people who are struggling from malnutrition, a number 6 years consecutively now, due to first COVID and climate, and now to climate and conflict. I think as a community working on food systems, we need to have our eyes wide open and fighting backwards on this challenge of ensuring that people have access to healthy diet. Half of the world's population is not accessing healthy diet, and this is something that we should be deeply concerned about. Third, I think we want you to recognize, and this is a strong message coming from the IPBES Nexus assessment, is that currently our assessment is that the challenges around justice, around health, around environment are completely integrated, but we're deeply concerned that our solutions are not. If you think that food and climate is a solution, we would like to again remind you that the role and the opportunity for business, and this is a complicated challenge, is that when you're thinking about an intervention, we urge you to think about the impacts of your intervention, not just against climate reporting, but against health dimensions and dimensions. It's no longer enough to say that we have progressed in sustainability, but we need to have clear on the impact on each of these nexus elements. Business role, companies sit at the center of food value chains, without a doubt. Thus, you're both drivers of impact and levers of transformation. I'm pleased to hear, Suzanne, I think your three motivations: economics, evidence, and emotion, and that we are talking about emotion, and that we are talking about the moral imperative. Our colleague from Indonesia raised that as well. It's not just important that we drive that transition, but I think it's now safe to say, and the evidence supports, that's a matter of survival for us to take responsibility for these outcomes. We talk a lot about the right to healthy diets, and this is absolutely essential, but I think considering food's outsized impact on the environment, we need to recognize that healthy diets are not just a right, they're a responsibility, and not enough conversation this week in terms we recognize that responsibility. This includes reducing unhealthy overconsumption because of its outsized impact environment and how that impact gets imposed on the most marginalized in our communities. So second question on, how do you translate scientific findings like the Atlantic Commission or National Food-Based Dietary Guidelines or the IPBES Nexus Assessment into actionable insights for companies? One, I think that we need to translate complexity into relevance. And here, I think as a member of the scientific community, I would urge my colleagues in science to recognize that it's insufficient for us to publish reports every 5 years and expect the sector to act. We need to create spaces where science can engage, iterate, and interact with the private sector and civil society to help drive change. I think there's a responsibility for the scientific sector. It's normal for science to constantly improve and consider new questions. However, there's a growing number of clear principles that we would urge you to think about. I know I hear constantly from the private sector, we're looking for better metrics. We're looking for the gold standard. Please stop waiting for that gold standard. Science will continue to iterate on it, but I think everyone in this room will recognize a healthy diet. See, they use the Atlantic Commission's Planetary Health Diet, whether you use National Food-Based Dietary Guidelines, these are sufficient sources of evidence for you to begin to progress. Let's stop debating regenerative, organic, or agroecological. We know what sustainable food production looks like. Great talk with Leah Winowicki from ICRAF last night. Soil health is about halting erosion, returning organic matter to soils, rotating and diversity crops in those soils, keeping at least 10 to 20% habitat per square kilometers in both city and farms. These are stable recommendations that you can work on, that are adaptable to context, and that allow you to begin to act now and to collaborate with science to improve on this matter. There are simple principles that can be adapted to guide your actions. Finally, create sector-specific benchmarks. We are now working in collaboration with Nexus Action, which we formerly called the Mobility Process, convening non-meters. This includes chefs, restaurants, and food service, food retail, and food manufacturers, to identify what have you been most proud about in accomplishing over the past 5 years. What's your ambition over the next 5 years in terms of food system action? What's stopping you from acting on that ambition? What are the lock-ins that we need to unlock? And what are the actions that you're willing to stop? Often the question that each of our communities has the hardest time answering. There are practical tools from science that we need to make more available: science-based targets, life cycle assessments, and product footprints. We encourage you all to develop scenario planning and use food system transition pathways to think about where you, your company, want to be in 2030 and 2050, considering health, sustainability, and justice. This again requires greater engagement by science with the community. Maybe the Dutch triangle or diamond, is one example that we can use from. I wanted to conclude with one other reflection, and that translating reports into sector-specific benchmarks and roadmaps is how we drive uptake. We need to think and plan for the future. This is key for ensuring accountability, and I'd add credibility for the private sector. And we know that credibility is in short supply right now. It allows us to celebrate and reward successes while putting pressures on actions that drive externalities. Accountability is both necessary to reward and facilitate emergence of true value while halting and supporting for true cost. And in this sense, I mean true cost in terms of the cost, in terms of externalities. We did a Food System Economics Commission that found that the food sector is 10 trillion in value. That's 12% of GDP. It has 11 trillion in externalities on health. This is money that national governments are paying due to food system action. It has 11 trillion in environmental externalities. Both the environmental and the health externalities are increasing much more quickly than the value of food systems. Important so that governments can set the right incentives, the right standards for the private sector to ask. And I would also say to penalize those actions which are not compatible with health and sustainability. I would anticipate that governments with their stretched budgets are going to be increasingly tired of carrying the externalities of the food system and are going to be looking for the private sector to reduce externalities. 5, just quick last points to emphasize that are very short. 1, there's a moral and business imperative for action of aligning with science. Healthy diets are not just a right, but in light of the outside impact of food and environment, they are, I think, a responsibility. And I'm glad, Deborah, that you started with 2, science is a foundation for accountability, not just inspiration. We'd urge you to use food-based dietary guidelines, planetary boundaries, and social justice guardrails, not just as constraints on business, but as the innovation space. They help to drive that innovation. I think there's a point that you also made, Ms. Lisbon. Importance of shared metric transparencies is really important, but please stop waiting for the perfect metric or the perfect science. We have global guidance through planetary boundaries, through the IPBES assessments, the IPCC assessments. You're going to need to develop downscaled, context-specific measures, but you need to begin to act and we need to begin to adapt as we go. This is a point also made by several other panelists. 4th, we need bold and early movers to shape the standard. We're in short deficit of courageous leadership, and I'd urge all of us to harness our inner David Navarro and really to step up and represent that courageous leadership. Partnerships between science, business, and policy are fundamental. No one can do it alone, but I'd urge us to add as a 4th component, partnerships with society to help drive momentum forward.
Thank you so much. You covered a lot, so I will not try to summarize, but just a reminder that I'm just the scientific community for providing that foundation. And while the scientific community needs to stay curious, it's not an excuse to wait for that because there's a solid foundation to build upon. So thank you for that. I need to urge the next speakers to stick to their time. That's the consequence of a multi-stakeholder dialogue that we want to hear from many different perspectives. So please, because I'm trying to get 1 or 2 more comments from the floor later on. Thank you for appreciating that. I will now move to Francine Picard-Mukuzi, the co-founder and director of partnerships of the Samba Center for Food and Climate and coordinator for the Zero Hunger Code. I would really like to hear that, which we've referenced a lot by previous speakers, the perspective of civil society organizations. What can you do to help companies advance reducing hunger? And what do you believe you need from the UN and the broader multilateral system to ensure that these commitments from the private sector translate into measurable impact?
Thank you very much. My name is Mukazi. So yes, actually, when you asked me that question, I was like wondering, private sector, civil society. I think we need also to understand this is really a heterogeneous landscape. CSOs are quite diverse, from international NGOs to citizen movements. And the same for the private sector. We are talking about multinational corporation, but also there is a small scale farmers. So the question is how we can bring these 2 words to hunger. And I think that there is maybe 3 points that I would like to highlight. We need to maintain this constructive dialogue among those different stakeholders, provide evidence and support. When we are talking about this constructive dialogue, civil society can ask the right question and demand transparency. This is one of the roles. They can also and current commitment publicly, and some with the Zero Hunger, we're also working with Member of Parliament to try also draft some kind of the agenda and ensure that we remain on our responsibility. but also they can also, is not a work of shaming, but it also by the civil society to recognize that when companies are doing good, we need to amplify their impact. And this is really, really important. So that's why we are talking about this constructive dialogue. So one of the things that I would also like to showcase is I think most of the stakeholders here highlighted evidence and data. And you cannot ask the civil society to go beyond their work. Actually, they are there to do business, but we are asking them to contribute to our global aim. And for that, we need to provide them the tool. We need to give them this data. And one of the initiatives that different organizations, including GAIN, CARE, FAO, WFP also are committed to, and that has emerged during the first Food System Summit, is what we call the Zero Hunger Private Sector Pledge. It's actually an initiative that offers to companies a clear roadmap based on research that we have done that provide evidence and identify only 10 high impact priority intervention to it could integrate small farmers support, scale up social protection and program, but it gives a company something very clear and also ask them, and specifically for this big company, there is some country in demand. And we have recognized that who the need are more greatest than over, and they need investment. And sometimes if we want to change this global narrative, we need to target those companies. So what we are asking companies to do is not pledging, but actually aligning their investment with this priority. But also we are asking them to disclose their financial commitment and ensuring that when those 19 countries that we have recognized, there is already some kind of commitment. And we are also putting in place and monitoring and ensure that we're also walking the talk. And I think we cannot go to a meeting where pledging. Pledging is a talk. It's good for our reputation, but we need to actually ensure that we are delivering. And this is really, really key. And I think also when we're talking about private sector, I also highlighted that there is multiple private sector. So some of the private sector that we have throughout this pledge are small private sector that are requiring, they lack resources, they lack technical capacity. And for them, we need also to be able to provide them this facilitation for them to be able to deliver. And I think that when we're talking about how can the civil society and the private sector are working together, we need to have this complexity in mind. Maybe because of time, to reflect on this question on civil society needs to move, but they need also to have incentives. And I think maybe somehow we need to maybe rethink what these incentives mean and reward investment to drive maybe the outcome that we are looking for. And the Chamber Center for which I'm working is trying to look at how the opportunity to provide a financial value to the positive outcome. And I think that could be something that will help private sector to move. We need to actually to work on that. And I invited you to have that kind of reflection with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Francine. I wanted to thank you for your nuanced contribution. In terms of nuance, in the specific sense, is that the private sector is a wildly diverse space, ranging from small SMEs to very large multinational corporations, and that also requires from civil society to approach both in a very place of capacity building and sometimes from a place of holding them accountable to pledges made. Thank you so much for that. I want to now invite Christine Campeau, Global Director for Food and Nutrition System at CARE. And with a question to kick you off, workers' rights and decent jobs are a crucial part of the food system transformation. What do employers need to do to ensure that the fundamental principles of decent jobs are applied in their operations and in their supply chain?
Hello, everyone. We've heard a lot from our opening speakers about farmers, but I just want to remind us that there are a lot of people working across our agri-food systems. In total, it's 1.3 billion people. So let's think the corporate responsibility extends to all those people, from processing to transportation. And yeah, we're on a continent right now where 40%, the largest youth population in the world, 40% are under 15 years old. So we have to think about all this next generation that's coming in. We want to work in a sector which, faces high level of working poverty, chronic food insecurity, lack of labor and social protection. 2/3 of our global poor are in agriculture. I don't know, that doesn't sound like the most attractive career trajectory for me. 112 kids are working in agriculture sector. So big numbers and big problems that we're all here to try and find solutions for. Luckily, in the run up to the first UNFSS, CARE was asked by the Secretary General to lead an action track for 2 years on advancing equitable livelihoods. And so we worked with companies, we worked with trade unionists, workers, governments, everybody in every country to try and surface some of these solutions to the challenges that we faced. And once the Food System Summit was done in 2021, I'm a policy director. So I always think, okay, where's the policy? And I was like, wait, we have no global policy for decent work in the agri-food sector? No wonder. And our opening remarks told us about how important policy is. And so we worked with the ILO and we're like, why is there no global policy in the agri-food sector? And they said, oh, the negotiations failed and failed and failed. And so luckily we went back to the drawing board, and in 2023 we set that global policy now for decent work in the agri-food sector. It is called, because I hope the work that our organizers are going to do on their blueprint really look at the promotion of decent work in the agri-food sector guidelines. So everything that happens in the ILO is by tripartite. So the governments, the employees, and the workers and trade unions are working together to develop guidelines. That means there's ownership in what is developed, and that means every stakeholder knows what their responsibility is. And that's actually a beautiful way of working. If you look through this document that's been created, Chapter 2, for example, on right to work, it talks about how best to ensure freedom of association and effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining, which is super important for workers and unions. It talks about ways to eliminate all forms of forced or compulsory labor. Gives you the necessary steps to abolish child labor in the sector, and the essentials to ensure safe and healthy work environments for all employees. So it really is a guideline, a guidebook almost, with step-by-step actions that governments, companies, and workers need to take along our food systems to make sure that we have an attractive place for people to work, and especially our center. It also levels the playing field for companies, ensuring that companies work along a specific set of criteria to, for example, promote formalization, lifelong learning, access to markets and new technologies. And it lays out specific guidelines about living conditions, wages, terms of employment, access to social protection, and the importance of routine labor inspections. And we meet in Geneva every year for 2 weeks in June at the International Labor Conference. And that's where we look through progress. Have we made progress that have been committed? So that's where we come together. And again, I'm a policy person. So we've got the labor policy set, but we're talking about food systems. So I was really happy that we were able to jump from Geneva to Rome last year at our Committee on World Food Security and host a 3-hour session where we had governments, workers, and companies talking about what this looks like in the agri-food sector space, to make sure that our diplomats in Rome working on food and ag know what's happening in Geneva. Was back so that the ministries of agriculture and the ministries of labor are working together at national level. Everybody knows in this room that policies are great and wonderful, but they are text. So we are working very hard right now with the ILO and IFAD. Those are the partners that we've been doing this work with to implement those guidelines. So we're hosting regional workshops and training starting in Asia this year, so that these guidelines do become active at national level. If you would like to get involved in any of that, please come to me. I will make sure your country can be involved. There's also tools. ILO has created great tools on, for example, their SCORE, Sustaining Competitive Responsible Enterprises. And it really helps companies understand, as our speaker said, we're human and not everybody thinks through the system the way they could. So it helps them understand the core principles about decent work, areas where they could improve their work, and really ways, the steps that they need to take to improve their work. It provides practical classroom training with in-fact, and then the companies then set up a task team to hold the company responsible and reportable to the ILO. So that's another great tool. I've heard from our colleagues in ILO Ethiopia, I hope you're in the room, I'm not wearing my contacts, so if you are here, that they even, with JICA funding, they've even added on to the tool, the Kaizen approach, which makes sure that social dialogue and really talking with the workers and the unions is part of that tool to make sure companies are getting it right. So I think I'm at time. If you would like to know anything more about decent work, we have a coalition called Decent Work and Equitable Food Systems Coalition. Come to me and I'm happy to share more. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. And we really look forward to continuing to working with you. And given your policy person, I would like to also remind the room that this circus moves to Qatar for the World Social Summit later this year, and one of the key topics there will be around living wages and living incomes, which I think sit at the heart of many of the topics that you spoke to. So we also look forward to working there again with you in Global Compact. With that, I'm going to move, because a lot has been said about reporting and about data, and that requires standards. So we're very pleased to have one of the world's most important standards when it comes to corporate sustainability reporting with us, which is GRI. So I would like to give the floor to Douglas Kativu, Director of the African Network of the Global Reporting Initiative. And again, I'm going to kick you off with a question. What are some of the specific challenges of tracking company performance here in Africa, and how to address these?
Thank you. And firstly, if I may extend our appreciation to the Global Compact for the opportunity to be part of this dialogue. ESG reporting, like all the other regions in Africa, is evolving, and the challenges, I don't think they are very dissimilar to some of the challenges that are being experienced in the other regions. Some of these challenges, if I may just highlight those, come from the fragmentation within the reporting landscape, the multiplicity of reporting frameworks, and the lack of alignment, especially when it comes to approaches to materiality, creates inconsistencies in what companies report, thereby making comparability of data for decision-making a big challenge. Unlike the other regions that have been pointed out, like the EU, that are subscribing to a common set of principles and objectives, we don't have that kind of regional alignment and harmonization on the continent. We have supported stock exchanges in some of the regional countries to develop ESG guidance. But these are characterized also by different approaches in terms of approaches to materiality, approaches to whether they be voluntary or mandatory, and also even within the same stock exchange in terms of which companies should be subjected to the ESG guidance between the top listed companies as well as the rest of the listed companies. And market readiness is often cited as a key consideration in most of these markets. Another significant challenge has to do with the integrity and credibility of data. I think that has also been highlighted. A recent report by Emergent Africa confirms that this is leading to inconsistent and low quality disclosures. In many, this was focused more on South Africa. Many companies are lacking the integrated systems and the infrastructure that is needed to ESG data appropriately. And independent third-party assurance of ESG data is very limited in most of the countries, creating a mistrust among stakeholders, notably the civil side organizations, investors, as well as regulators who are wary of the greenwashing risk from untested and unverified claims. Another significant challenge is the limitation in terms of skills and competence I think you already highlighted some of the challenges, even at the leadership level, in terms of the understanding and the integration of ESG into business strategies. ESG is still evolving, like I mentioned, and skills are lacking across all levels, from the operations to executives to boardrooms. Many leaders, I think, that we are pretty much approaching ESG as a compliance issue, missing on the business opportunity to drive innovation, growth, and resilience. Capacity is also an issue when it comes to stakeholder engagement. Most of the impacted communities and SMEs along the value chains lack the capacity to participate meaningfully in ESG, leading to poor materiality assessments and misalignment between expectations between the companies as well as the stakeholders. Regulatory and market weaknesses is also another category of challenges. Policies are existing or often aligned to the authoritative global commitments, but resources for compliance are limited, leading to low uptake and varied reporting quality. Must also regulations and accountability initiatives focus largely on large enterprises, leaving out the millions of SMEs who constitute the majority of business in Africa, and that is also linked to the lack of capacity or limited capacity within the SMEs as well. This is also changing. Market regulators and operators are slowly making ESG disclosures mandatory in some areas like climate adaptation and mitigation, and social inclusion rather, but progress remains uneven. And governance weaknesses is also another category of challenges being experienced. I think it has already been mentioned by Suzanne that leadership on ESG is often missing, not just in the private sector, but also in the public sector, especially outside the leading companies. Institutional frameworks to support ESG integration and enforcement are pretty much still developing in many countries. And the good thing is that most boards are also slowly becoming alive to the importance of sustainability disclosure in attracting investment. And this is also being driven mostly by investor and stakeholder activism. What are we doing as GRI in terms of addressing some of these challenges? We are also working with other standard setters to enhance the interoperability of our standards with those of other standard setters. We're working closely with the ISSB towards a comprehensive global framework for reporting sustainability impacts, risks, and opportunities. I'm not sure how well involved the accountability framework that you did mention, but probably either the UN Global Compact or GRI and ISSB need to enlarge the circle of organizations that are working towards this comprehensive global framework for reporting, for corporate reporting rather. And our standards have always been grounded in global agreements like the UN SDGs, the Paris Agreement, the IPCC Greenhouse Protocol, the Montreal Framework on Biodiversity, thereby ensuring global legitimacy as well as alignment and relevance to these global commitments. With regards to capacity building, we recently established an online academy where we're also looking at developing certified sustainability professionals that are certified according to the application. We also established a network of over 100 certified training partners globally, including 14 in Africa that are also helping to build capacity on applying the GRI standards in the countries in the region. Extending collaboration to academic institutions business networks and stock exchanges to develop a pipeline of sustainability professionals on the continent. We are also supporting SMEs directly with tailored training to build a culture of measuring and reporting for continuous improvement. In that regard, we also welcome and support the efforts by the African Development Bank to establish an Africa-wide ESG hub to promote ESG access, data access to investors investing on the continent, and to also build the capacity of enterprises on the continent. In terms of the policy work, we're working with the stock exchanges, like I mentioned, and with the shift towards mandatory reporting, we are also regulators and advocating that regulated reporting should be grounded in both impact materiality as well as financial materiality. Lastly, to enhance ESG data quality and analysis, we recently launched the GRI Standards Taxonomy a few weeks ago. And this taxonomy, we hope it will enable digital data and make comparability of data and decision-making data useful. And then the taxonomy is also designed to work the taxonomies of the ISSB as well as the ESRS taxonomies to meet stakeholder needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Douglas, thank you for highlighting the progress that you have been working on here in Africa on ESG disclosure broadly. You mentioned, I think being quite often overlooked, how much is happening here on the continent. I do want to pick up on one thing that you said, which is and as a segue to our next speaker, as investors as a key user of that data alongside civil society and others. So we're going to turn to Laura from the Forest and Land and Agriculture lead at Climate Arc, an organization that is trying to boil all this data down to decision-making useful information for investors. And I was wondering if you could speak to some of to your recent report that talks about some of the lock-ins you described, especially for investors. And we have to keep it at time.
Yeah, and in the interest of that, I think I'll focus on the data limitations and gaps. So at Climate Arc, we're focused on channeling decision useful, accessible, transparent data on corporate transition into financial decision makers in a way that supports the direction, the flow of capital to those companies who are leading the charge on this front. But we are dealing with challenges both in terms of the quality and quantity of data on corporate activity and challenges around the metrics used to interpret and translate that data into an understanding of where companies are sitting on that transition pathway. So in terms of limitations with the data, there are many. The key ones that we are encountering are the fragmented nature of data on corporate performance, so data on their climate impact, their nature impact, their impact on nutrition and healthy diets, on social impacts, are collected in different places under different frameworks using different units, are often kind of curated by different organizations. And that lends to a very siloed approach to understanding and prioritization across the different dimensions of food systems that we know need to be looked at in concert. Data is patchy. Disclosure in the sector is still very limited, especially on non-climate related dimensions. Analyses of corporate progress often focus on a relatively small number of companies who are kind of among the best at disclosing. WBA is leading the charge in terms of expanding the universe of companies for which we have visibility and reliable data, but more work is needed across the wider ecosystem. The data is not always decision useful, so there are kind of challenge the structure, consistency, timeliness, verification of the data that is disclosed and reported by companies. Equally, that data is often behind a paywall, and a very significant paywall, meaning that it's not available society, to the broad range of stakeholders who we really want to be interrogating corporate activity and performance. And in terms of the limitations with the metrics and the analyses of corporate transition, there is a lack of consensus on what good looks like and a lack of clarity on transition pathways and what they mean in practice for businesses. So fully agree with Fabrice that this should not be a barrier to corporate action. Nevertheless, there is a need for us to get more specific on what we mean by, for example, a transition to regenerative agriculture. What are we expecting to see from companies? What do we want them to report on in terms of the crops that they're operating in, the inputs they're sourcing, the kinds of business relationships that they're curating, how they're prioritizing CapEx and capital allocation, what targets they're setting, what data they're collecting, and how they're disclosing it. We also need to see greater disaggregation in terms of what those transition pathways from country to the next, from one landscape or even farm to the next, also across commodities. So how do these pathways differ, and how can we get a bit more specific and concrete about what we mean by sustainable transition? And what does it take for companies to generate the confidence and the support that they need from shareholders and from investors to pivot their business model in a way that is truly transformative, that isn't incremental, isn't operating at the periphery of what they're doing, but is really thinking about their core business and how to shift that business into the future. I've got 1 minute left, but I'm actually going to give it back to you so that we can have some questions from the floor.
Thank you so much. You were the last speaker, but I don't want to, I want to really remind the audience of this very important work that you're doing in terms of unlocking the investment community as a very important driver of the transition broadly, but also to specifically do that for food and agriculture, because it's a different kind of emission, it's a different system, it needs different data, a different understanding, and there's a lot of education and capacity building that we need to do on the side of investors. So thank you for doing all of that work. As you've seen, we're unfortunately out of time, so I won't be able to take, despite you being very brief, I can't take questions or statements from the floor, but I would like, so I apologize for that. I will be around and we'll continue to work with all of you as we bring this agenda forward, but unfortunately there won't be time today to make those statements. I do want to give an opportunity to James Lomax, the Food System Coordination, from the Food System Coordination Hub and Ecosystem Division at the United Nations Environment, to close us off. I thought I didn't. Is she there?
Laura.
Oh, sorry. And then we'll go to Lara. Thank you, James.
I think we probably can say the same.
All right, James. Then we're going to start with you, and then Lara can add what we missed.
Thank you. I will be very brief. So thank you so much. It's been a very rich session. So UNEP, we launched a report about a month ago, and if you want to read it, with Chatham House, with Laura there, when she used to work for Chatham House, really sort of stating the importance of working with the private sector, and not just with SMEs, but the kind of companies that really define the food system. And I think sometimes we just have to be bold in what we talk about, and we have to talk about the fact that there are companies and there are oligopolies. So there are lots of consolidations in markets, etc., for both buyers and for sellers. And I think that has to be recognized. And once that's recognized, and how we can start to use that as an opportunity for real acceleration of change. Because right now we have to move to action and we have to move to impact. And being exclusionary with the biggest companies, I'm afraid is not going to work in 2025. The time is now. We have to work if we want to accelerate transformation. That's if we want to effectively get transformation, we have to start to do this. So what have we heard? We've heard about the fact that we need a whole of government approach, but we need a whole of society approach. And private sector is a very important part of that whole of society approach. We have to do that. We've heard about that we cannot really transform food systems sector. And accountability and transparency and trust. I think, Earthryn, you spoke about trust. I think this is really, really important, but it's got to go on both sides, right? It's got to go on both sides. The private sector's got to trust the UN has got to trust the private sector. So I really feel like we're on the start of a journey, and I think UNEP is very proud to be a part of the environmental part of that. And I think the last point I wanted to talk about is data. As the guardians and the supporters of the multilateral environmental agreements, we are supporting governments to report on biodiversity and climate, etc. There's a paucity of data. Who holds the data? So it's often the private sector that holds the data. So we have to create that bridge between public and private sector data, and we'd be very happy. And I think that starts through trust, starts through transparency, and it starts through accountability. So we're very, very proud as UNEP to be taking this forward with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, and for highlighting for increasing market concentration within the food and agriculture sector. Had some recent examples in the recent weeks, actually, of big mergers taking place. And we have to, of course, see what the implication of that is for the wider food system. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Laura Blanco, Director of Sustainable Development at the Executive Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations, for our final words.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you to the organizers of this conversation. I managed to escape and was able to hear part of the conversation that you have been having here today. And I have to say that, first of all, thank you for engaging, and thank you for bringing forward all the possibilities, all the wealth of information. And I think most importantly, what I have heard is the willingness to engage. I'll go back to 2023 when we did the Secretary General report for the UN Food System Stocktake. We did realize that we had an important gap in terms of private sector engagement. The call to action that came out of UNFSS +2 challenged us to take steps and to change the level of engagement with the private sector. I had the possibility yesterday of seeing some of the data that the Global Compact had in terms of participation of private sector and businesses in UNFSS +4, and I think we've come a long way. If I remember correctly, Sandra, we have something like 360 participants from businesses. That's a long way, I think, from what we had in 2023. We have CEOs, we have small and medium enterprises, and most importantly, we have participation that has been informed as well by a process. And we've had partners, the Global Compact, that has helped us organize the conversation, Ambassador Cousin, of course, our friends from the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, and we are, I would say, in a very different moment than where we were 2 years back. I do want something that I've been hearing regarding the issue of trust. And I think that we cannot speak about accountability without investing in trust as well. And most importantly, accountability is only possible when there's clarity about what we are accountable for. And the fact that we are coming together now in this conversation to look at ways in which we can transform food systems, it is a very complex space. It is not only about, I've heard here, we have maybe a little bit more of information, of experience, of processes around climate, but food systems has many dimensions. It is about nutrition, it is about jobs, it is health, and we have a lot of work to do. But in order to back in 2027, and I'm saying 2027 because it is the moment where we are going to have the next SDG summit and a good moment to look at how we have done in one of the key transitions towards the acceleration of the SDGs. We need to be able to know what the homework looks like. And I think that what I have heard here are good building blocks in terms of really making sure that we know what the homework is and making sure that we use the tools, we use the science, we use the measurements, those that are available, and create those that are still not available so that we can really come together and exchange, not about the accountability of how the in terms of accountability, but really this is about mutual accountability. And that is the wording that we actually have in several of the documents coming out of the UNFSS +2 and those that brought us to our discussion today. So there's a lot of work going forward. We are closing today, I think, in a good note in terms of the objectives that we wanted to achieve. And we have still milestones this year: the World Social Summit, the world's second Summit on Social Development, and of course COP30. Let's just make sure that we keep the engagement, we keep the structured dialogue, and I would say the Deputy Secretary General and the Secretary, thanks for showing up and for everything that you brought to the conversation today.
And with that, we come to a close. So thank you, Lara, for grounding some of these truths, for setting out the homework for all of us towards 27 and ultimately 2030. And let me close off by, because I think that you would like to. Oh.
Sorry. I know we're running short of time. I just wanted to say one thing, because we did promise that we want the next steps to be a consultative process. So we have all of your details here. I know we weren't able to take questions and answers. I know there's people who might have questions, statements, inputs that they want to give to the process. The idea going forward is that we will contact all of you, provide the links. We're going through a consultative, as I say, process. We want to look at inputs, make sure we can cover everything that we can to the time management piece. Sessions that people want to go to, but thank you for your time, and we really look forward to collaborating with you on the next step. Sorry to cut you short.
No, thank you so much.
To be sure we talk about that.
Thank you. I think this is the most important message of today, that corporate accountability is a collective effort, and we're going to need all of you moving forward in this direction. So thank you so much to the speakers and to everyone listening, taking notes of all the important things that have been said and shared today. Thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of this program.